From the first mandatory prayer before the dawn breaks to the fifth prayer at night, Muslims recite the first chapter of the Quran at least 34 times. And each time they ask for guidance on the straight path. The importance of staying on the straight path can be assessed from the number of times it's repeated in the Quran. A staggering 43 times in total. When Muslims approach the Hadith collection, which are sources that contain the sayings, acts, and tacit approval by Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, they find the same overwhelming emphasis on moderation and staying on the straight path. The question is, what does the straight path mean? Could this straight path lead Muslims to extremism? Could this child become an extremist despite the fact that the book that he is reading is instructing him to not commit excesses in his religion? Could this child become radicalized when all that he learns from his prophet is the same message? Distance yourself from being extreme in religion. Is there something hidden in these simple words that both a majority of Muslims and non-Muslims continue to miss? What is it that is not clear as ABC here? Of course, we have heard enough that Muslims are reminded of the dangers of extremism. But there is something missing here that we need to highlight in this video, and that is the logic and rationale behind the straight path, which a majority of Muslims in particular miss despite asking to be guided on the straight path at least 34 times a day. Straight path is the way between the two extremes. The extreme that makes practicing Islam difficult, and the extreme that strays away and trivializes religion. There is a relationship between the limits and the straight path. The Quran says, "These are the limits ordained by Allah, so do not transgress them." The middle path between these extremes is moderation. Muslims are commanded to practice istiqamah, which means perseverance in moderation, when they adopt the middle course. Therefore, stand firm in the straight path as you are commanded. You and those with you turn unto God and transgress not from the path. Verily, He sees all that you do. The logic behind the injunctions to avoid extremes is that everything has two extremes or gradations of a pendulum swing, and that you cannot survive if you deviate and go to the extremes. Every single virtue stands in between two extremes. When we speak of generosity, for example, it's the middle posture between prodigality and niggardliness, and so is courage, which stands in the middle of audacity and cowardliness. So the straight path emphasized in the Quran is in the middle. It's the place where there is no energy pushing in either direction, where the pendulum has been permitted to come to balance. The Prophet, peace be upon him, is reported to have said, In all matters, the middlemost is the best choice. Muslims find guidance in Islamic teachings to be moderate in specific cognitive, social, and behavioral issues. There are specific commands for avoiding extremism in personal, moral, religious, legal, economic, international relations, and indeed for applying moderation as broad as a philosophy of life. Everything has its extremes. Following Islam as a deen, as a way of life, is the place in which these forces balance each other out. Unless you go out of the way to the extreme, these forces will tend to stay in peaceful harmony. Anyone who wants to understand Islam as a deen must take a closer look as to what lies between the two extremes. If you watch closer, you will see that neither extreme can last. How long can a pendulum stay at one of the outermost positions? It can only remain there for a moment. How long can a pendulum stay at rest? It can remain there forever because there are no forces moving it out of balance. This is the balance. It's the center. The power of being in center is phenomenal. If you want to imagine the power of being on the straight path, you need to examine how destructive it is and how energy is wasted swinging sideways or going on tangents. Suppose you want to go from point A to point B, but instead of walking there directly, you move from side to side like a sine wave or go on tangents. That would take either a long time or you would get lost and never reach the destination. In other words, to be efficient, you must focus and center all of your energies on the middle path. This concentration of energies is the power of moderation for staying on the straight path. When you stop going to the extremes and distracting sideways, you will find that you have far more energy than you ever imagined. This principle holds true in every aspect of life, from personal to collective. Basically, you waste tremendous amount of energy at the extremes. The more extreme you go in anything that you do, the more it becomes stressful, full-time project affecting other faculties and aspects of your life. According to Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, Allah has set a straight path that's surrounded by two walls on both sides, with several open doors within the walls covered with curtains. There's a caller on the gate of the straight path who heralds, "O people, stay on the path and do not deviate from it." Meanwhile, a caller from above the path is also warning any person who wants to open any of these doors. Woe unto you, do not open it, for if you open it, you will pass through. The straight path is Islam. The two walls are Allah's set limits, while the doors resemble what Allah has prohibited. The collar on the gate of the straight path is the Book of Allah, while the collar above the straight path is Allah's admonishment in the heart of every believer. The question is, how do you stop being attracted to the extremes? Amazingly enough, you do this by first realizing that you are hitting the extremes. Then you seek Quranic guidance, make course correction, and just leave it alone. Your center won't keep swinging to the extremes unless you feed the extremes with energy. Just let the extremes go. Don't participate in them, and the pendulum will naturally come toward the center. You will find real peace of mind and enjoy real contentment. Only if you choose to stay on the straight path and avoid extremes that you will come to have a peace of mind and appreciate Islam as a deen, a way of life. As you start practicing moderation, you become much clearer because so much energy is flowing up in you. This experience of being contented and present in each moment will become your natural state. You won't be fearful, anxious, or fixated on certain things, or caught up in thoughts about the opposites. As you get clearer, life's events will start to unfold in slow motion. Once this happens, events, no matter what they are, will no longer seem confusing or overwhelming. You do the best you can and leave the rest to the ultimate controller, the creator to whom you have submitted your will. And thus life becomes easy. You have to experience this to believe it. This is quite different from how most people live, some of whom claim to be Muslims and following the deen and also asking to be on the straight path at least 34 times a day. But they still go to the extremes and do not feel contented. It's just because praying has become a ritual for them.
اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين
The magic happens only when we understand the essence of this core message of Islam. The results are then amazing. A simple example is that if you are driving a car and somebody cuts you off, you may get upset for the next hour, or maybe for the rest of the day. For someone at peace with himself, events do take place, but last just as long as they are taking place. That's it. If you are driving and somebody cuts you off, you feel your energy start to pull off center. You actually feel it in your heart. As you let go in the spirit of forgiveness, it comes back to the center. You don't react negatively. You don't follow the extremes. So, your energy comes back to the current moment. That's why when the next event happens, you are there. You are always there, and that makes you more capable than the person who is reacting to the past imbalances or is out there frustrated about the issues that are totally outside of his control. To give you an idea of what it feels like to be in the center, to be a moderate, to have a balance, let's use the example of sailing. We cannot sail if there is no wind or no sails. That's one extreme, as we are not going anywhere. On the opposite extreme, if we go sailing when there is tremendous wind, again, we are not going anywhere. In sailing, there are many forces interacting together. There's the wind, the sail, the rudder, and the tension of the ropes on the sail. There's a tremendous interplay of forces. If the wind is blowing and you hold the sail too loosely, it doesn't work. If you hold it too tightly, you tip over. To sail properly, you must hold it just right. But where is just right? It's in the center point of the tautness of the sail against the forces of the wind. It's what we call the sweet point, the middle. Imagine that feeling when the wind hits the sail just right and you're holding the ropes just right. You take off with a perfect feeling of balance. Then the wind shifts and you adjust to it. You, the wind, the sail, and the water are one. All the forces are in harmony. Should one force shift, the others shift at the same instant. This is what it means to move in the way, avoiding extremes. The balance point is not static. It's a dynamic equilibrium. You move from balance point to balance point, from center to center, as the situation demands. That's what's in your control. You can control the outside forces that push you to the extremes. You have to adjust yourself and your position with reference to the forces outside. You must reach the point where your whole interest lies in the balance and not in trying to change that is outside of your control. It's that way with all of your life. The more you can work with the balance, the more you can just sail through life. Effortless action is what happens when we follow the middle way. Life happens. You are there. There is no burden. There is no stress. The forces take care of themselves as you sit in the center. The ideal way to live for a believer. But what's the framework? What are the tools and tips to help us stay in the middle? The source of all that is the Quran, the touchstone. Its very name, Furqan, means the criterion, the standard to distinguish between good and bad. The Quran is like a blind person's stick. A blind person walks down a city street with the use of a cane. Let's give that cane a name. It's the seeker of the extremes. It's the feeler of the edges. It's the toucher of the limits of our Creator that we have to respect. People who walk with the use of this cane often tap from side to side. They are not trying to find where they should walk. Rather, they are trying to find where they shouldn't walk. They are finding the extremes. If you cannot see your way, all you can do is feel the edges. If you feel the edges and don't go there, you will stay on the safe and straight path. That's how you use the Quran, as a guide to help you avoid the edges and the extremes. The teachings of Islam demands that we are moderate in everything we do by default. The Quran reveals the way of the center, the way of balance. Islam doesn't lead to extremism of any kind, period. Islam is a middle path in its creedal system. Islam is neither anthropomorphic nor nihilistic, neither pantheist nor atheist. In terms of its views on human nature, Islam sees man neither godlike or flawless, nor devilish and doomed. Rather, Islam preaches that human beings are born pure, but with free will to choose good and evil. Thus, humans are liable to make mistakes due to weakness, inconsistency, and high propensity to be influenced by external forces. However, we are also blessed with faculties and guidance which help us in achieving elevated spiritual potential as well as human excellence. This helps us plainly see that in total contrast to the perception that Islam promotes extremism, the fact remains that the core message of Islam commands moderation. Moderation in all aspects of life. Moderation right across the entire spectrum of Islamic teachings, and moderation from belief to worship, to social relations, relations among nations, time, place, human thought, and the exercise virtually of all the basic rights and liberties of individuals. One important piece of evidence on moderation is this verse that occurs in the exact middle of the longest chapter in the Quran. Thus, we have made you a nation justly balanced, that you might be witness over the people, and the messenger a witness over you. Here, the Muslim Ummah's status as a witness is made conditional on their commitment to moderation and truth. Because testimony of extremists who transgress the limits of moderation is inadmissible. That's why a true believer in his right mind will never knowingly and intentionally trade this honor by going to the extremes.
لبيك وسعديك والخير بيديك